What's up, world? This is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I want to welcome you to Real Role Models in the Community. I am here today with my friend and my brother, Coy Lafferty. Coy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Max. How are you?
Man, I'm good, and I really appreciate you being with me today, man. We've talked about how I'm kind of experimenting with this medium, and I just think you're a really invaluable member to the community, and I just thought you were a good candidate for this theme, and I really appreciate you doing it, man.
Well, man, those are some kind words. I'm not sure that I deserve any of them, but thank you very much.
I don't
Glad.
know about that. So let me do a little bit of an intro. And so, Coy, you and I, although we do have some other connections, we really know each other from being classmates at the Masters of Public Servant uh, program at Cumberland University.
That's
Um,
correct. Yeah,
and so you are currently serving for the Lebanon Police Department, correct?
that's right. Yeah.
But I know, to me, as I perceive you, and I think as far as you consider yourself, you're a husband and a father first. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I'm actually a Christian first,
Amen.
husband and father next, and somewhere down the line, I'm a police officer.
All right, all right. Well, tell me a little bit about your family.
So I'm married to Suzanne. Suzanne is a professor, as you know, at Cumberland University. As a matter of fact, I have three kids. I've got a son named Joel Lafferty that I actually had before Suzanne and I met. Suzanne is my second wife. Then I have a daughter named Chloe. She's with that's Suzanne and I's daughter. Chloe is currently at Belmont University. She is 18 years old. And then I have my youngest is Max, like yourself. And
Good
Max
name.
is 13 and he goes to Winfrey Bryant. So I have
Okay.
three and I have two grandkids. Joel, my oldest, has two kids, Blakely and Abram, little boy and a little girl.
Well, I did not know that. I didn't know that you was a grandpa, so to
Yeah,
speak. So that's a
yeah,
good spread, and that's a blessing.
yeah. It
So
is.
that
It is a blessing. It is
yeah.
a blessing.
All right. Well, so also when I think about you, I think about you as being, a longtime community member here in Lebanon, Wilson County, Tennessee. And not to call you old or anything, but I do look at you as a seasoned law enforcement agent. And you currently serve for the Lebanon Police Department. But just back up for me a little bit. Tell me a little bit. When were you born? What's your birthday?
So I was born in 1968, March 7th of 1968. So those of you, I'll save you doing the math. I'll be 58 if Lord lets me live next month. So
Hey, amen, amen. Happy early birthday for
thank
sure.
you.
That's cool. So, tell me a little about your folks and about how you grew up.
So I grew up. My father was in the military, and we grew up. I grew up on military bases, literally around the world. We were stationed at several bases in the United States, and then we lived in Turkey for a couple of years. And when he retired, we retired back to Jackson County, Tennessee, which is how I ended up in Middle Tennessee. But I was adopted. My parents adopted me. They were actually stationed. There used to be an Air Force base in Smyrna, Tennessee, and my father was a airman, and he was stationed in Smyrna, and they adopted me, of course, while they lived in Smyrna. So until recently, interesting story. Until recently, I just did the ancestry.com and actually found out who my biological parents were. But prior to that, I had no idea. So that's kind of been a fun side note.
Yeah, you and I talked about that a little bit, and I saw some of that on the social media that you've gotten to connect with some of your biological family,
Yeah,
I
it's been
guess,
great.
right?
It's been great. It's been great connecting with people that I was biologically related to, which is not something that I ever experienced in my life. I had people that were really dear to me, but I didn't have anybody except my kids that I was biologically related to. So it's been kind of cool.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I'd like to dive into some aspects of that, and maybe how you feel like that's impacted you along the way. But that, amongst other things, I would like to have a conversation for another day with you, if
Sure,
that's all
absolutely,
right.
absolutely.
All right. And so another thing that I found really interesting right then that I didn't know about you was you living in Turkey and kind of moving around in your father's military service. I bet that gave you a particular worldview as a youngster.
You know what? I didn't realize it at the time, Max, but yeah, I think it did. I think it gave me a perspective that maybe other people that didn't have that experience had. I was exposed to a lot of culture, or other people's cultures, I guess I should say, um, um, that was different than my own. I've always been fortunate enough to know that there's a whole world out there that may look at things and experience things different than we do, and I think that has been I think that's been an advantage in some ways to me over the years. You know, as every service person that gets to go around the world sees, I think that experience is really enhancing.
Yeah, and not something that I really thought we would get into. But there's different kinds of educations, right? And
Right.
travel and experiencing those other cultures, like you said, really helps to broaden the mind and
I
allow
took
you
it.
to accept other things.
I took it for granted for many years, but looking back, absolutely, that is an education that forms my worldview without a doubt.
Yeah, and I really would like to dive into all of that as far as your upbringing and travel, what you experienced in that travel, and then either even getting on into you meeting your biological family in that process. Man, that's really interesting to me. But we just don't have time right now.
Yeah.
So we're gonna put a pin in that if that's all
Okay.
right with you, brother.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, tell me, how long have you been in law enforcement?
So I started in law enforcement in March of '94. So 32 years, I guess.
Okay.
Well, it will be 32 years in the next month.
What made you get into that? Did you kind of always have an affinity towards a profession, or what?
I had I had a desire to serve. I really wanted to join the military, Max, but at the time I got married at a young age, and I was married and had a child, and frankly I wasn't able to join the military. That would have kind of disrupted a lot of things. And my former wife didn't want to move away from her family, which I totally understand. That wasn't that wasn't the way that I that's not the way that I was raised or I viewed like a hometown type thing. I didn't really feel a need to stay there necessarily like my former wife did, which I respect that. I'm not, that's not, I'm not saying anything bad about her, but she didn't want to move. So, that was a big disappointment for me for a while. And I think that desire to join the military kind of led me to my interest, or at least looking at law enforcement or local government, state government type thing.
Okay. So early on, you had this. I'm gonna call it a calling to serve. Is that all right with you? I call that.
I think that, you know what, I think it's, you know what, I would like to think it's a calling, but maybe that would be too egotistical a desire to serve anyway. You
Well,
know,
and so I wasn't going to get into this, but you very honorably and very wisely said that you were a Christian first, and so you know a little bit about my background, and so there's some themes that I've found in my theological journey, and kind of I guess stand up to some Protestant tenets, you might say, but we are all responding to God, right? God is first. God exists first, and we are all responding to some sort of calling,
right.
right? And that is what gives us our purpose, right? And so when you say that you just wanted to serve, right? I know what that feels like, and I didn't know how to express that when I was younger at all. But looking back now, I do. Kind of place that terminology on it. You were responding to what the way God was leading you, or God calling you. Maybe
So
that's my
people,
opinion.
yeah, no, so people have actually said that to me before, that I responded to a calling, and other people have said I've had a calling for law enforcement in their life. I'm talking about other officers. I was always just hesitant to say that myself because I've got some people that are really dear to me that I respect their calling into the to be a pastor or into the priesthood or whatever the case may be. And I don't want to liken my calling to that. I don't want to cheapen their calling by saying my calling to be in law enforcement is equivalent to that. Um, you know, I can't deny that you're right that God places us where He wants us. So in that respect, you may be proper in saying that it was God's calling, but I don't want to get out above my skis and say that I'm doing God's work.
Well, let me offer a
I
rebuttal
hope
to that.
I hope that He's pleased in something I've done. You know,
Amen. Well, and I would just say, as to use your words, not to cheapen uh, uh, God's servants. We'll say God's work, God's
right?
creation. Don't cheapen God's work in you, sir.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I hope that God can use me. You know,
Yeah.
so
Amen.
and I hope God has used me. So.
Okay. Well, so back to you beginning in law enforcement. Did you have any kind of vocation before going into law enforcement, or was it kind of a thing where the military opportunity wasn't there, so that was a good substitute, and that just
So,
flowed
so,
like that?
so prior to that, I really only had three jobs. When I got out of when I got out of high school, I had been working at D.T. McCall and Sons. You're probably familiar with them. They're local business, and I delivered for them all through high school. From the time I got my driver's license on, I started working with delivery, and they were a wonderful employer, and they blessed me over the years many times. But I was working for them, and I decided that I wanted to become for reasons that I now looking back can't explain. I had a chance to get a job as sort of a route salesman. So I had a sales route in Nashville, and I was actually doing like gum and mints and that sort of thing. I was going to like convenience stores and selling gum and mints and that sort of thing. And that didn't last very long because my whatever talent I had, that wasn't it. So so that definitely was not my calling. And I went back to McCall's. They were gracious enough to hire me back. And I was actually working there when a position came open with the Carthage Police Department. And that was my first job in law enforcement. I knew one of my high school classmates worked there, and he let me come out and do a ride along with him. And at the time, you know, as cheesy as this may be, at the time I had gotten into watching the television show Cops, like so many did at the time. And I thought, man,
This is the '90s, early '90s.
yeah, yeah,
Early '90s cops is the best, man. Them
yeah,
crackheads were fast,
yeah,
man. Them good.
yeah. So that made me interested in it, and then that coupled with just the opportunity that happened at the right time, it was. You almost have to look at it like a God thing because it just kind of happened. The timing, the opportunity, and my desire just kind of came together at one time. It wasn't any special talent I had that allowed it. And at that time in the '90s, and even beyond that, it was law enforcement was a lot different than it is right now. It's a lot more technical now. It's a lot more. Um, it's kind of changed it's still considered a blue collar job, but it's not as blue as it used to be. And at that time it was the people they were looking for were former military, and a lot of the talents that we look for in young officers now didn't necessarily have to be involved in. Like I wasn't required to have any kind of college or I basically had to have a clean background and could once I passed the background check, be able to pass the physical, and that was about it.
Okay,
Not
and so just to clear things up that I was kind of wanting to get at, so it was really just the combination of those things, the opportunity and where you were in your life. You didn't kind of grow up saying, "Hey, I want to be in law enforcement, and this is my path to my career." Did you
no,
know? Did you have any kind of idea of what you wanted to be when you grew up, delivering
yeah,
furniture for
yeah,
DT McCall's?
yeah. So because my father was in the Air Force, and I was raised on Air Force bases, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And you know, I didn't have man. There's so many things that happened that caused that not to be an avenue that I could go down. And physically, you can tell by me wearing glasses, my eyesight would have never allowed me to do that anyway. But that just didn't work out. But growing up, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to follow my father into the Air Force, and I wanted to be a pilot. Now, he wasn't a pilot, but that's what I wanted to be.
Okay, okay, okay. I guess getting at what I'm getting at is things just don't go all the way they're planned all
No,
the time,
not at all.
but they still work out the way they ought to, maybe.
Yes, I believe it does. I
All
believe
right,
it.
all right.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the onboarding process and coming on to the Carthage Police. Um, so really, you just did the background check. There was a physical assessment, and you were hired.
Yeah. That's and it really at that time. That's really all. I don't. I had an interview. I didn't have any kind of written test or any kind of civil service test or anything like that. There was just a background check, a interview with the chief of police, and that was pretty much it.
Okay.
And then it just OJT after that. And that was kind of standard across the board actually. You
Okay.
know.
How is that different than now?
So
What does the process look like now?
okay, the process I can speak for Lebanon, and I'm kind of familiar. It's pretty much the same across the board, but now there's an exam you have to take. It's sort of a civil service exam. So there's a score that you're given on an exam you're taking. You have to take some kind of a physical test. In our case, we do an obstacle course. So you got to pass the exam, you got to pass the obstacle course. Then there is a panel interview that you have to take. And then, of course, on top of all that, you have to pass the psychological and the drug testing and all that sort of thing. But I think the biggest difference now is um, the education level of the candidates. Like I can't quote you numbers now, but just for an example, I think the last time that I knew anything about it, probably 40%. We've got roughly 130 officers at the Lebanon Police Department. I think the last I knew, there's like 40% had a bachelor's degree or better, and I think there's 8 or 10 that have master's degrees. So that wasn't common necessarily, several years ago. Now, with Tennessee Promise and different things, education is more accessible than it was to some people several years ago. That's part of the issue. But there's other things that have happened that typically now the police candidate is higher educated than they were at one time back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And in some agencies, in fact, a lot of agencies now require a certain number of college credits or at least an associate's and
Associate.
yeah, associates, and in some cases, like the TBI and even federal law enforcement require a bachelor's degree. So
Okay.
so those requirements are you know higher than they used to be. So I would say that in a nutshell, to put it succinctly, I think that your candidates now are higher educated than they were than when I was hired. Now we still hire a lot from military. We had a lot of returning vets from Afghanistan and Iraq, and a lot of those men and women, kind of like me, they wanted to serve. They had been serving. That was something they were familiar with. So it was kind of a natural progression. That's still the case. That will probably always be the case.
And so I just want to clear up when you were talking about Lebanon's requirements.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear you say that they are required to have that associate's degree
They're,
or
they're,
graduate from some police
they're,
academy.
they're not. Well, they do have to. They do. Everybody has to go to the police academy. And that was the case even when I was hired. That normally comes after you're hired, though. Unless
Okay,
you're
okay,
unless you're a certified officer, that comes after you're hired. After you're hired, then we send you to the police academy.
okay.
And
And
that
what is this police academy? Because man, I don't know. I seen the movies
sure,
back in the day, and that can't be it.
yeah, yeah. So the police academy is kind of different depending on the agency, but most state agencies send their officers to Donaldson to the Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy. Of course, THP has their own academy. Metro Nashville has their own academy. Chattanooga, Knoxville, they have their own academy. Walter State does a police academy, and I think Blount County does their own police academy.
Okay.
Um, but other than that, everybody sends them to Donaldson. And what it is it's a 10-week, basically, it's like Army boot camp. You have to live there. You go, you check in, and for 10 weeks, they put you through it's a physical regimen, a physical training that you do. Of course, firearms, and you do pursuit driving. They do the driving track and all that stuff. They do defensive tactics. They in some cases introduce people to physical tactics for the first time.
Yeah.
That's not always the case, but they do defensive tactics training. Um, there's obviously certain sections of it are designed for the law. So there's constitutional law and different classes you take. There's now there's a lot of required classes. The state has certain mandated classes like child sex abuse is it has to be taught in there. Um, De-escalation techniques, those sort of things. Often the legislature will pass legislation that say, "Hey, this has to be included in police training." So it's kind of an ever evolving thing, but it's basically a 10-week boot camp that they have to go through.
Okay.
Then when they complete that, there's a 14-week. They do if you're hired on at Lebanon, when you complete the 10-week police academy, then you come back to the police department and you ride with an FTO for an extra 14 weeks. So you're in the car with a field training officer, and then you do the OJT for basically 14 weeks, and then they have to do the field training officers does what's called a daily observation report, a DOR, and every day they critique and they score the police candidates on different components of their job. And then when they finish the 14 weeks, they're either rolled back into training if the FTOs don't feel like they've completed, they're rolled back for whatever extra time that they're decided to give them, and or they are allowed to go out on their own.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's I didn't have really any real insight into the process, and that's one thing that I wanted to know about. Um, for folks that might be interested in law enforcement and not know how to get started, or folks that maybe are looking for a way to serve and really don't know how to express that, what kind of guidance would you give them if they were wanting to go into that path?
So the most important thing is obviously, and I try to get to young people that have any inkling that they might want to get into law enforcement. The first thing that they've got to make sure that they do is they've got to keep a clean record. I've seen a lot of really good people that I would love to have seen them got into law enforcement, but because of some mistake that they made, and in some cases it is a mistake, and I acknowledge that. But it's kind of unsurmountable sometimes. So they've got to be really careful with whatever kind of interactions they have with law enforcement, because during those background checks, all that stuff comes up, and that can make the difference between you and another candidate that doesn't have that. It's not always fatal, but look at it as a competition. I try to tell my kids, you're in competition every day, whether you want to be or not. And so I would say position yourself. I'd say first off is your background. Be careful about that. You have to be able to pass drug tests. Now, without getting into a discussion on the merits of the law, right now it's illegal to do certain things that some people believe that it shouldn't be illegal, so they do it anyway. But the problem is it can still be held against you in trying to get into law enforcement. So you got to really watch that. That's not me, coming out in support of or against anything. It's just you have to watch that. And then what I would say to someone who really wanted to get in law enforcement, go ahead and position yourself to look better as a candidate. Get that associate's degree. Try to do those things. Make acquaintances, because at the end of the day, like most things, sometimes it helps you to know some people. You know what I mean? That, good old fashioned somebody that can say, hey, he's a good guy. When I got into law enforcement, one of the things I had going for me is the guy I was telling you about that I came out and rode with, my former classmate in high school. Him being a police officer positioned him personally to be able to say, hey, Coy's a good guy, man. He's, that sort of thing still matters, So I'd say position yourself the best you can, you know, keep yourself clean in the background as you can, or be willing to come up with some kind of explanation for it. Some case in some cases, probably better than I. Maybe you may need to get an expungement or something. Maybe you do what you need to do to get your record to where that's not, impeded, and you know, make yourself available, and those things will happen. Right now, for the last year or so, there's not a lot of people want to get in law enforcement like it used to be. We don't have the same number of candidates that we used to have. So, you know, if that's what you're wanting to do right now, it's kind of the time to do it. You know.
Good information. Good information. All right, man. Well, I'm really enjoying this, and I've got a lot more that I want to ask you, but I want to kind of wrap up for today.
Sure.
If you would, for me, tell me, what do you want folks to know about you, or what do you think is the most important thing about you and your walk and your life that you want to express to people?
Well, man, that's a tough question. That's right. Wow. So here's what I want people to know about me. I'm a flawed individual. So, don't, I've made the mistake in my life to put people on a pedestal and say because they're this or that or the other that they're better than this person or that person. And in almost every instance, they let me down. So what I would say is don't expect more from me than just a human being, and understand that I try to have the right attitude. Um, Even though I seem like maybe I think I know something sometimes, a lot of times I don't. And I hope I'm always willing to be taught something. And you know what? Hey, I appreciate people just give me grace. I ask for grace. Hopefully I give grace. That's what I want people to know about me.
Awesome, awesome. And this is kind of the same thing. What do you think folks ought to know about the Lebanon Police Department?
What I would say about the Lebanon Police Department is the same thing I would say about whatever police department you name, whatever police department you want to be. Okay. The Lebanon Police Department is made up of a lot of individuals, a lot of people that have got families, and they've got the same dynamics that everybody else has. They sometimes get behind on their bills, sometimes they get divorces, sometimes that they have kids that get in trouble, sometimes they get kicked out for not paying rent. You know, we the last one, by the way, we have certain policies that says that that's not supposed to happen. I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's a community of individuals that are trying to do a really difficult job the best way that they can. And while they're imperfect and they make mistakes just like I do, um, we try really, really hard to be a department that Lebanon can be proud of. Within the confines of us being human beings, I think we do a pretty good job, and we'll always try to do that.
Yeah, and I can attest that the Lebanon Police Department is certainly involved in the community, and not just maybe in cops and robbers aspect of law enforcement, but in supporting civic demonstrations, community activities, and stuff like that. So I can definitely attest to that. Coy, I want to really thank you for doing this with me, man. I want to continue this. I've got some more questions for you that I didn't even know I had. So if we could take another opportunity to do this sometime, I would really enjoy that.
You let me know. You let me know when I'm there. Okay. Hey, one other thing, because you kind of inspired me a little bit in what you said there. Another thing about the Lebanon Police Department, because you mentioned this, you mentioned about them being involved in the community, and in my answer, I wasn't prepared for that question, so I was kind of all over the place. But that is one thing that I know that it's important to the chief. I'm really good friends with the chief. I know school, and through the leadership, we try to make sure that that message, is throughout the department. And I know that it means a lot to him. So I'm gonna go ahead and say it. We really, really, really understand that we work for the community. Okay, so we absolutely desire to be and try to be community members. So when you were talking about us being present at those different things, that's what we're supposed to do. That's where our public is. That's where the people that we work for are. So while sometimes we may not be there for whatever reasons, we try to attend as much of that stuff as we can because we live in the community. This is where we shop. This is where we sleep. This is where our wives and kids drive on the roads. They interact with everybody. We are the community, in other words. So, I appreciate you kind of drawing that in for me.
And I appreciate you, and that's very well said. Hey, we're gonna close off. This has been Real Role Models in the Community, brought to you by Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.